Well, let's bring in three members of Parliament now to debate the current blows to the Canadian economy and how the government is responding to those blows. From the foyer of the House of Commons tonight, I'm joined by DARREN Fisher, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health. Michael Cooper is the Deputy Finance Critic for the official opposition Conservatives, and Peter Julian is the Finance Critic for the NDP. Good to see you all, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
DARREN Fisher, let me start with you. We are seeing the continued spread of the virus in this country, although so far no widespread community outbreak that everybody fears. We knew the big economic hit was coming, and now it's here. What is your government's message to Canadians about this major economic shock and how you're responding to it?
Well, we just heard the Minister of Finance say very clearly that we had the fiscal capacity to deal with whatever comes our way. And as you know, this has been changing. This coronavirus issue has been changing so quickly, and being able to respond as needed is something that's very important, and we're very fortunate that we have the ability to deal with that.
Right, but when the Minister of Finance says that the government has the fiscal firepower to respond to this crisis, isn't he really saying it just isn't an issue to spend again because you're already running a $30 billion deficit and you'll run a higher one if you need to?
Well, he certainly didn't say that. He did say that he's working with all of his counterparts and ensuring that we have the ability to respond as needed. So he certainly didn't speak to any future deficits regarding, the coronavirus issue.
No, but I think the message is that you're not going to be afraid to spend on this because you haven't been afraid to spend on other issues as a government for the last 5 years. And I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm saying that you're saying that your approach to the debt to GDP ratio says you're on the right track fiscally and you're happy to spend here if you need to.
Yeah, and we've seen good results from the investing that we've done in Canada in the last few years. We've seen the lowest unemployment in my lifetime. We've seen over 1 million jobs created by Canadians. So, we've seen successes over the last few years, and it's built in that the capacity that the PBO agrees is there.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, let me turn to you. You're an Alberta MP. Your province is suffering another shot today with oil prices crumbling. How does your party believe the government should be responding to this shock?
Well, we have a government that governed for the last 4 years as if the good times would never end. And so they abandoned all of their fiscal anchors with massive waste, massive deficits, massive debt, with no plan, no contingency for a downturn in the economy and other uncertainties arising from events like a coronavirus or the illegal blockades. Instead, what we have is a government that has left the cupboard bare. And as a result, we don't have the kind of fiscal response, the fiscal capacity that we should have.
But to follow that analogy,
spending.
To follow that analogy, if there's a cupboard that's bare, the government can go to another cupboard and borrow stuff to fill up that cupboard. So I guess, given the current situation, notwithstanding what you say this government's done for the past 5 years, given the current situation, would you suggest now they cut back on spending or go ahead and spend more if that's what's needed to deal with this shock?
We have proposed a number of ideas to stimulate the Canadian economy, and that begins by reducing taxes on workers and small businesses, rolling back anti-development legislation like the No Pipelines Bill C-69 and the Tanker Ban Bill C-48, reducing red tape, which has been a stranglehold on small businesses by imposing a 2-for-1 rule. In other words, for every new regulation, that there be the elimination of 2 regulations, which builds upon the current 1-to-1 rule, and eliminating waste that this government has spent hundreds of millions of dollars giving to their corporate friends. So the answer is
and those measures you would take right now in this current situation, cutting taxes and so on, you think that would be what would help the country get through this latest shock?
We believe that would help restore confidence, return investment, and get Canadians back to work, contrary to the approach of this government, which is just to spend, spend, and spend some more.
Mr. Julian, how should the government be responding to these economic shocks from the coronavirus?
Well, what they should be doing is making investments investments in our healthcare system. The Harper Conservatives slashed what should have been a clause that allows for adequate health care funding across the country, and the Liberal government has continued that practice. So healthcare funding has been strapped because of those measures. We also believe, and Jagmeet Singh said this very eloquently in the House today, that when somebody is having to choose between putting food on the table for their family or having to isolate themselves because they may have contracted the coronavirus, it's a very difficult choice to make. And so EI has to allow for that sick leave for people that don't have provision of sick leave for many Canadian families, and about half of them are $200 away from insolvency on any given month. For many Canadian families, they don't have provision for sick leave. If they don't go to work, they can't feed their family. So these are the kinds of measures, practical measures, that you would expect a government to take. But we have to find on the revenue side as well the way it means to pay for that. And the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer talked, as you know, Peter, about $25 billion that go offshore every year in overseas tax havens. We need to start closing that and making sure we're building up fiscal capacity of the government even more.
Mr. Fisher, the COVID-19 impact comes along with the impact from blockades and already slumping economic growth in this country, even before the coronavirus hit. So when the finance minister says the fiscal framework allows you to handle these shocks, if the object, which it's been since your government took power, is to maintain the debt to GDP ratio, given this kind of shock, does that mean spending cuts in other areas would have to come in the budget?
Well, what we've seen, Peter, is we've seen a willingness to help Canadians. First of all, we think about the health and safety of Canadians, and then we think about the impact on the economy. And, you know, at times like these are trying times, it's important that we look after Canada. We've invested in Canada for the last 5 years. We've seen growth. We've seen really good results. And now it's time to step up to the plate and be there to help Canadians as needed and to help Canadian businesses as needed. And I'm looking forward to Budget 2020 to see whether there's things in there that the Minister of Finance is willing to do for Canadians.
All right, so you're suggesting we don't need to see cuts in this budget if the government's going to maintain a track that relationship on debt to GDP ratio, which everybody seems to suggest is going to take a hit given the current crisis.
Well, you know, we've seen the debt to GDP ratio go down every year, I think, except for one. And we've seen, you know, we've heard from economists all over the world that we're in a very, very strong position, the strongest position in that measurement in all of the G7. So, you know, we feel strong about this. We feel that it's important to take care of Canadians and take care of Canadian businesses. And I think it's important to realize that these are trying times, and this is the time that we'll...
Mr. Cooper, let me, you can jump in here, but I want to start, hang on. If the government is going to have to spend billions to manage this economic crisis, should the budget begin to make cuts, or is that the wrong time for that?
Well, look, this government has left Canada in a very difficult position because they spent during the good times without any contingency plan for a global economic downturn or a downturn in the economy.
I just want to be clear, you're not suggesting they cut during the bad times now, notwithstanding what they may have done before.
Well, they put Canada in a very difficult position, and I know that the government would like to talk about coronavirus as though that is the reason for the economic downturn, but after spending tens of billions of dollars, $75 billion of new debt, we had 0.3% GDP growth in the last quarter of 2019. Currently, our economy is projected to grow at half of that of the United States. Canada has the highest unemployment rate in the G7 other than Italy and France, who are hardly models in terms of how they have performed economically, 30% higher than that of the United States.
My question, though, was very clear. Should this budget deliver cuts, or is this the wrong time for that?
It's certainly time to look at restoring fiscal responsibility. And we have put forward a comprehensive plan to do just that, to stimulate the Canadian economy.
Mr. Julian, what do you want to see? Like, I've jumped ahead here because we don't know when the budget's going to be, but all things being equal, it should be in the next few weeks unless it gets pushed off because of the crisis we're in now. What does that budget have to do?
Well, we believe in stimulus for clean energy, that we need to start making that transition to clean energy. Before the coronavirus, we were already being beset with huge cost to our economy of climate change, $5 billion a year, $5 billion, another $5 billion in insurance costs that have increased as well. So we're already seeing the impacts of climate change. We need to see a government that takes action on that. And we're looking for practical elements that would actually make a big difference. For example, pharmacare, that's a no-brainer. When the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer says that Canada as a whole would save $4 billion and Canadian businesses would save $6 billion from universal pharmacare.
Do you think that's still realistic? I'm just we're going to have a First Ministers meeting Friday, and they're going to go to that room and they're going to say, put pharmacare to the side. We need an increase in health transfers to the provinces. That's the priority now, and certainly that seems to be amplified while we're talking about coronavirus.
Absolutely, and that's an issue. But as well, we're talking about pharmacare because of the practical implications of that. And as I say, we need to take action on the revenue side. That's where the overseas tax havens, where putting in place capping the stock option loophole, all of these giveaways that go to very wealthy Canadians and very profitable corporations need to stop so we have the wherewithal to make the investments that are going to help people.
All right, gentlemen, that's our time for tonight. Thank you all for your perspectives, and we'll talk again. Take care.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks very much.
Well, let's get